Welcome to the deep dive. You know, few things spark as much passion, I think, as much debate as education.
Hmm.
We all want the best for kids,
Right.
right? For their future, for the opportunities schools are supposed to give them.
Absolutely.
But what if the system itself, the one designed to, lift all children up, is fundamentally broken for many?
That's a tough question.
What if that promise of public education is, for far too many kids, just, well, an illusion?
Mm.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the complex and, yeah, sometimes pretty disheartening world of public K-12 education here in the U.S.
Hmm.
We're drawing on a really rich set of sources that, frankly, challenge a lot of conventional wisdom.
They really do.
And our mission today is pretty clear. We
Mm.
want to unpack why schools serving the poorest children often seem to get the least resources. It feels backwards, doesn't it?
It really does.
We'll trace the historical threads, the legal ones, the economic factors that have woven together what our sources call a stark dual education system in America.
Yeah.
And you'll discover how these big policy decisions, societal shifts, not just what happens in the classroom, have shaped this landscape. And also what a few surprising successes might reveal about, maybe, a path forward.
Right.
This isn't just about test scores, it's about the actual structure of opportunity, the role education plays in society for everyone. Okay, so let's unpack this. Our sources, they hit us right away with a pretty stark reality. Public education, especially K-12, is in crisis.
Yeah, that's the starting point.
And here's the counterintuitive bit. Schools serving the poorest kids, they don't get the most resources. Often it's the opposite.
It seems completely backwards.
The sources argue this happens because of what they call the FTE sector. It's like families with higher wages, more affluent, often full-time employed households. They're often reluctant to really support the low-wage sector.
Hmm. A reluctance to share resources, essentially.
Exactly. And then the sources make this, well, pretty provocative claim.
Hmm.
They suggest that when it comes to funding education, we might be operating more like an oligarchy than a democracy.
That's a strong claim. And it's striking how our sources frame this whole problem not as, something new, but as having really deep historical roots.
Okay.
They point back to Elizabeth Shore's 1990 book, Within Our Reach. She argued pretty optimistically back then that we already knew how to educate poor children
Oh,
by providing extra support, medical help, psychological help, things like that.
makes sense.
But her project, the sources say, it ran afoul of racecraft, which is, the whole social machinery that creates and maintains racial categories and power dynamics,
Right.
and also fears that advancing integration and the improving fortunes of African Americans would somehow undermine white power structures.
Wow. So politics got in the way.
Politics and deep-seated fears. It's a powerful reminder, the sources say, that the kinds of support we knew were needed decades ago, we still desperately need them today.
So beyond race and power, our sources also explain that these problems in public ed are tangled up with gender, too.
Mm.
Like back in the 19th century, teaching was actually a really good job for women.
Mm.
Interesting, respected.
Yeah, much better than the alternatives, like textile factories. It offered some independence.
Right. But then something shifted in the 1970s, something
Oof.
that changed its appeal.
Yeah, and you have to ask, right, what happens when a profession loses its relative status?
Okay.
The sources point to the arrival of oral contraceptives. Women gain more control over family planning.
Mm-hmm.
That led to a big jump in women attending and graduating from college. Suddenly, new professions opened up: doctors, lawyers,
More options.
way more options, and frankly, more attractive ones financially. The sources show the wage gap just exploded. Women with graduate degrees started earning way more compared to teachers.
How much more?
It went from like 20% more in the late 80s to 40% more by 2000.
Wow.
So teaching just lost its competitive edge. You saw waves of teacher strikes in the 70s and 80s, unions trying to keep up.
But they couldn't.
They couldn't fully bridge that gap. And the sources are clear. Teaching kept losing ground, especially for experienced teachers, after 2000. And that hobbled public education, making it really hard to attract and keep skilled, creative teachers.
Okay, so attracting and keeping good teachers needs resources. That's key.
Mm-hmm.
But our sources argue there's an even deeper structural issue, something baked in by legal decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They point to this important decision by the Supreme Court in 1974 that they say effectively condemned urban school systems to growing poverty. Let's talk about Milliken v. Bradley.
Yeah, putting this in the bigger picture, Milliken v. Bradley in '74 was, a critical moment. maybe devastating for integration efforts.
Okay.
The NAACP brought the case, trying to push forward on Brown v. Board of Education, integrated schools.
Right.
But the Supreme Court ruled that school districts were not obligated to desegregate across district lines unless you could prove explicit racist intent in how those lines were drawn.
Explicit intent. That sounds hard to prove.
Exactly. The sources note it's super problematic because public decisions involve messy politics, lots of factors. Pinpointing specific intent is incredibly difficult.
So what was the practical effect?
Profound. It basically made it clear that white flight would successfully separate white suburbanites from their new dark-skinned neighbors.
So it locked in segregation between districts.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It ensured that Black urban communities would lack an adequate fiscal base, enough tax money for schools. Justice Lewis Powell, who was pretty new then, essentially turned Nixon's Southern strategy into national policy.
Wow.
Leading to segregated schools, inadequate resources. It's basically a new kind of separate and unequal, but based on class and district lines now, not just explicitly race.
That paints a really stark picture of how a court decision can just shape opportunity or the lack of it.
Yeah.
And this brings us right to the core issue. This dual education system our sources describe, what does that actually look like on the ground for kids, for families?
Well, the contrast is pretty striking as the sources lay it out. You basically have two separate educational systems mirroring that FTE sector, low-wage sector divide.
Okay.
Kids in the FTE sector, they generally attend reasonably good schools. Could be public schools in wealthier suburbs, could be private schools.
Right. People move for the schools.
Exactly. Pay high taxes for them or pay tuition. But then kids in the low-wage sector, they're mostly in poor urban public schools that are just starved for resources.
And the sources connect this to incarceration, too.
Yeah. They mentioned that with like a third of Black men impacted by mass incarceration, many Black children live in these struggling urban neighborhoods.
Which makes reform even harder.
Incredibly difficult. The needs are just vastly different between the two systems, and the FTE sector, as the sources state, remains largely reluctant to really fund the low-wage sector adequately.
And this gap, it's growing.
Dramatically. The sources say the education gap between the richest 10% and the poorest 10% has grown so much, it actually exceeds the racial gap in income now.
That's remarkable. A huge shift.
A profound shift in how opportunity is structured, absolutely.
Okay, so given this crisis, this deepening divide, people have tried reforms, right? Our sources mention things like more testing, the rise of charter schools.
Mm-hmm.
Do those offer the solutions needed, especially for that low-wage sector? Or are they maybe missing the mark?
Well, it raises the question, doesn't it? Are we diagnosing the right problem? Are these the right treatments? Our sources are pretty critical here.
Okay.
They note that testing, for instance, while it's popular, often seen as boosting accountability, it frequently fails to actually improve quality.
And it can have downsides.
Yeah, it can even discourage good potential teachers from entering or staying in the profession. And ultimately, it can end up preserving racial disparities, not fixing them.
How so?
Well, they give this striking example from Broward County, Florida. They introduced a universal nonverbal screening test for second graders.
Nonverbal. Okay.
And it tripled the proportion of Black and Latino students identified as gifted.
Wow, tripled.
Yeah. It showed how much teacher bias, or maybe just expectations and reliance on verbal tests, can miss talent. Teachers often, don't see gifted students in unexpected places.
So the nonverbal test bypassed that bias.
Seemingly, yes. But here's the kicker. The program got suspended because of funding cuts during the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, no.
And the disparities just reappeared. It shows testing isn't a magic bullet and funding matters hugely.
That's a powerful example. Okay, What about charter schools? They're so often talked about as like a key to unlocking public education, especially for disadvantaged kids. What do the sources say?
Well, zooming out, charter schools are, a mixed bag at best.
Okay.
They use public money, but they're often outside local control, not bound by union contracts. That creates a different environment, sure.
And some do well.
Some specific charters do seem to help poor, underachieving urban students, yes. But the sources conclude that charter schools as a whole have no impact on test scores and a negative impact on earnings.
Wait, negative impact on earnings, even if scores go up.
That's what the sources state. Even the best charters, the ones that might raise test scores and college enrollment, they find do not have a statistically significant impact on earnings later on.
Huh.
The sources call it the private-public oxymoron. They basically assert it's just not helping public education systemically.
And the sources give us a really vivid maybe cautionary tale of how these reforms can play out. They look closely at the Newark education reform effort.
Yes, indeed. The Newark story is presented as a pretty significant cautionary tale.
What happened there? Got a lot of attention, right? Big money involved.
Huge money. Back in 2010, then Mayor Cory Booker convinced Mark Zuckerberg to donate $100 million over 5 years.
Wow.
The goal was to kind of replicate corporate success in Newark schools, so they brought in these highly paid consultants
Described how?
as woefully uninformed about the actual realities of the low-wage education system.
Okay, so consultants with a corporate mindset arrive. How did that mesh with the schools, the community in Newark? What was their plan?
Well, according to the sources, they basically saw the existing principals and teachers as enemies, as obstacles.
Oof. Not a great start.
No, their plan was pretty drastic. Shrink the district, replace public schools with charters, track kids' data intensely, and run schools like managers in private business.
But very top-down.
Very. And driven by this desire for speedy results, get it done before the political winds change. But this approach led to what the sources call a death spiral for the traditional public schools.
How so?
They were basically stripped of funds, which went to the new initiatives or charters, and they were left with the students who had the highest needs.
And the parents, how did they react?
Newark parents, the sources say, were not enthusiastic. They didn't appreciate this top-down approach that didn't seem to involve them.
So this big, ambitious, heavily funded reform.
Yeah.
What was the final outcome?
Long story short, the plan collapsed.
Collapsed.
Yeah. Cory Booker became a senator, the consultants left for greener pastures, as the source puts it, and the children of Newark were abandoned.
Wow. That's harsh.
It's stark. The conclusion drawn in the narrative is that urban public schools are being asked to overcome nothing less than the effects of poverty. It echoes Elizabeth Short's point from 30 years earlier.
Just showing the problem hadn't gone away, maybe got worse.
Exactly. And that these quick, corporate-style fixes just didn't address those deep systemic roots of the problem.
Okay, so if those kinds of reforms often fall short, are there any successful models? Our sources point to Union City, New Jersey as this really powerful exception. What did they do differently? What went right there?
Yeah, it's a really striking contrast, especially to Newark. Union City schools around 1990 were facing this huge influx of Latino immigrant students. Things looked like they might collapse.
Yeah.
But they were saved, basically, by three interconnected things. First, the school leaders, and this seems important, were drawn from the community itself.
Local leadership.
Right. And they redesigned the curriculum with a really strong emphasis on early education. They put in full-day pre-kindergarten programs.
Full-day pre-K. That's significant.
Huge. And crucially, in both English and Spanish.
Both languages.
Yes. Which served this dual purpose. It introduced families, many poor and new to the system, to how education worked, and it prepared kids, many from homes with few books, to focus on reading right from the start.
Our sources really emphasize this early childhood piece. It seems like it's foundational, going beyond just ABCs to build other crucial skills. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. The sources bring in Nobel laureate James Heckman here. He states it pretty forcefully. The accident of birth is a principal source of inequality in America today.
Wow.
And he emphasizes that success isn't just about human capital, cognitive skills, reading, math. It's also heavily dependent on what he calls non-cognitive characteristics.
Like what?
Things like perseverance, motivation, self-confidence, paying attention, socio-emotional skills.
Yeah.
Our sources connect this closely to social capital.
Okay, social capital again.
Yes, which includes those qualities, but also, crucially, the trust that people will follow through on agreements, and these things are best learned early in childhood.
So if families in the low-wage sector struggle to provide that,
because they lack time, energy, resources, then public policy needs to step in. That's where things like Head Start come in.
right.
Which, the sources note, despite funding issues, demonstrably improves kids' lives. Less behavior problems, better reading.
But people say the effects fade out.
Right, and the sources tackle that directly. They argue the fade-out happens because those kids then go into the under-resourced, low-wage sector elementary schools.
So Head Start needs follow-through.
Exactly. It needs continuation in good schools to really work long-term, which is what happened in Union City.
Okay, so intensive early education led by the community was key, number one. What were the second and third steps in Union City?
Second step. They significantly increased the education budget.
Money matters.
Definitely. Taxes were raised locally, but also critically, the New Jersey Supreme Court stepped in with the Abbott decisions.
What did those do?
They mandated equal funding across districts in New Jersey and monitored it for a decade. This made sure Union City got the funds it needed for its programs.
So state-level intervention helped.
Massively. That robust preschool program, backed by the Abbott funding, had huge effects, closing something like 20 to 40% of the achievement gap between minority and white students.
Incredible.
And the third step.
A commitment to slow, steady progress. This wasn't a quick fix. It was led by educators from the community, thinking in terms of decades, not just election cycles.
Patience and persistence.
Exactly. And that long-term commitment built crucial social capital, real trust between the community and the schools and between teachers and students.
This idea of social capital, it just keeps coming up as so central in the sources. It sounds like it's way more than just classroom instruction. So why is it so critical, especially for the low-wage sector? And how does it actually work in a place like Union City? Well, the sources really push us to think about why it's critical. They define it again as that trust the belief that people who agree on something will actually follow through.
Okay.
And they say that trust is the absolute key for successful preschool in low-wage communities and really for any successful investment in human capital.
We have an analogy for this.
Yeah, kind of a cool one. The Villanova Wildcats 2016 NCAA basketball win. The star player had the ball for the last shot, but he passed to an open teammate who made the winning basket.
Teamwork, trust.
Exactly. Perfect example of that trust and working together. The sources also make an interesting point. It's inequality, not necessarily diversity, that breeds distrust in communities.
All right, interesting distinction.
Yeah, in fact, they cite studies showing that diverse groups, like in financial markets, can actually reduce problems like booms and busts because people aren't all thinking the same way. They spot different things.
So social capital isn't just nice to have, it's foundational.
Foundational for a resilient, successful community, absolutely.
So wrapping this up, we've seen today how this crisis in public education for the low-wage sector is this really complex web, right? Woven from historical neglect, big policy decisions like Milliken v. Bradley.
The decline of teaching as an attractive profession.
Right, and these attempts at quick fixes like we
Yeah.
saw tragically in Newark that often miss the mark.
Yeah, misdirected reforms.
And this is crucial. We've also seen a powerful alternative, that Union City model. It shows that sustained, community-led investment, especially in early education, and really focusing on building that social capital, it can transform lives in schools.
It offers some real hope, doesn't it?
Understanding this dual system, it's not just academic, is it? It really shapes the actual opportunities available to so many people in our country.
Absolutely.
And as the sources argue, it ends up damaging the whole country by limiting who gets to fully participate economically and socially.
Restricts potential for everyone.
It really shows that true reform, it has to go way beyond just the classroom walls. It touches every part of a community.
So when you consider that stark contrast, the FTE sector schools versus the low-wage sector schools, and you see the proven sustainable success of a model like Union City, it makes you ask, what responsibility do we all bear? Society as a whole, what's our responsibility to make sure that the accident of birth doesn't just become fate for any child in America?
Yeah.
What might you, listening right now, rethink about how we value, how we invest in every child's potential, moving beyond those quick fixes to maybe foster genuine long-term community trust and support like they did in Union City?